thank you so much for
What do you
giving
mean?
us
It sounds as though you're sort of relieved.
Absolutely relieved.
Okay, good.
Given that the chase has been really intense. but thank you so much. Really delighted to see you in India.
Good.
And you look fresh as a daisy.
Well, I know about fresh as a daisy. We had it was a long weekend.
I'm
very
sure.
long weekend.
I'm sure.
Very late in the well, it wasn't the early hours. It was the late hours of the early morning.
Yeah, the Ambanis have that effect.
Well,
let me start by saying, what a year, 2018.
well, yes, interesting year.
Most definitely.
As the Chinese say, not the Indians say. I don't know what the equivalent in India would be. We live in interesting times.
We most definitely
You're
do.
right.
But let me first, before I bang
Sure.
in some questions, ask you a
You don't
softer
have banging
question.
questions. You don't have banging questions. You don't have to prove your sort of journalistic womanhood to anybody,
Womanhood.
as opposed to manhood.
I would like you to reflect over the year, like
Yeah.
you have been asked several times. But most importantly, as we close the year now,
Yeah.
close down, and 2019 hopefully will be a fresher start.
Yeah.
You've had an interesting year, and you've managed to, launch a new company,
Yeah, we
make
did.
2 acquisitions.
Yes, we set ourselves a goal, or I set myself a goal, probably a way of putting it, to do 3 things by Christmas. So we did 2. So we get sort of two-thirds of the way on our report card, I guess. So I wanted to do one other thing before, but we've done very well. And I'm here with Victor, who runs Media Monks, and with his partner Wesley Tahar, and that's a very good. It's a $100 million company in 10 countries, 12 offices. It just opened in San Francisco. It's the 3rd office in the US. Strong, not in India.
Why not?
Well, that will come.
That
will come.
I mean,
So
with
that
Martin
must be
Sorrell, it has to
be
come.
one of your banging questions,
Not
I guess.
really.
And then, of course, a week or so ago, Mighty Hive,
Yes.
a programmatic operation based in San Francisco, run by Peter Kim, an ex-Google employee, and Christopher Martin, and a very strong crew. 900 people now at Media Monks. So when we first did our deal with them, we were about 750, and now over 900. And Mighty Hive 200 people. So we have 1,100 people in what will be, I guess, 12 countries now. We will add Canada and we'll add Australia. Otherwise, there's lap over between the two. But the basic heart of it is it's a purely digital operation. So very unlike WPP,
Sure.
which obviously I think still 60% traditional in that
Right.
sense, but a 40% in their case digital. In our case, we've started from the digital end of the business, and we've identified 3 areas that we think, on the basis, actually, to be fair, my experience at WPP, the 3 areas would be content, digital content. So you look at the sorts of things that an AKQA does, or which I don't think is here in India, or a VML, or a Wonderman, or an Ogilvy One, and when Ogilvy was not just one, which I think is the right way that I think John Seifert, the way he's implementing a unified company is clearly the way that the industry is going, and the clients want it. Execution is always difficult in that area, but looking at the digital content area, that's the first area.
Yeah.
Then first-party data. Again, if you look at Kantar, although that's being sold off now, we think, or from public announcements, might end up in private equity in some way, shape or form. In those areas, there are continuous syndicated research, the sort of things at Kantar World Panel that you see, or Lightspeed, that Kantar Health. These are very good companies that have got first-party data that are very important in developing that content that I referred to before. And then the final area would be media planning and buying, the sort of thing that Essence and Xaxis do within Group M, which are very oriented to digital.
Which you've already got with Mighty Hive.
Yes, well, yes. I mean, it might have slightly different. I mean, it's a programmatic consultancy, basically. It advises clients in a totally transparent way, in all senses of the word, whether they should have in-house operations, whether they should have hybrid in-house and out-house operations, or indeed remain out-house. And so we're agnostic about it. I mean, there are challenges about taking things in-house. You see this where people try to take it even in-house, even in India. The 2 areas where the biggest challenges are in technology, keeping up to date technology, particularly if there's cost pressure, and then talent. How do you keep the best talent in a business if you have sort of one set of categories, one category, or maybe two categories, and you're not a diverse operation like an agency operation where you see, good talent likes to see lots of industries and lots of different cases to work on.
What's the third thing you want to achieve by the end of the year?
Well, I wanted to do actually something else in the content area. Victor, as I say, who's with me here in Mumbai, and I am Wesley, his partner, want to do something else in the content operation to add to the scale of the content operation. But we'll see as we get into the new year.
Maybe.
Yeah, yes, but nothing fancy or enormous, but something that would cement in. MediaMonks is a very strong operation. As you saw from the third quarter results, growing about 45–50% a year. Mighty Hive doubling. I mean, these are businesses that are growing very fast from very small bases. I mean, we're only a $150 million operation on a pro forma basis for this year, with EBITDA around $30 million. So it's small, but the organic growth rate is very significant. So we'll get to that target range. And again, in my mind, there were three things I wanted to do by the end of the year. I wanted to get to about $300 million of revenue and about 40, 45, 50 of EBITDA. And, we can see a path to getting there from what we have now in MediaMonks and Mighty Hive within the next year or so. So I think we're well on the way. So as Christmas and New Year approaches, we can reflect on some of the good things that have happened in 2008. It wasn't such. Somebody wrote to me and said it was an annus horribilis. You remember the Queen mentioning that when she had the Great Fire at Windsor. I wouldn't put us in that category, but it wasn't a year that was bereft of any good things.
Of course not. Look at the last 6 months. Fantastic.
Yes, and we're having an interview here with you. I mean, what could be better than that?
Well, thank you so much. You're so kind. It's truly my lucky day. But if I had to...
What a day. India wins in Australia for the first time. I've got to rub this in. For the first time in 10 years.
If I had to ask you at the year in total, what would you say would be your biggest personal learnings? And I think it would be nice to hear your learnings for all of us.
Well,
as people look at you as somebody who's unstoppable.
Choose your board wisely, I think, is the answer to that. Choose your chairman wisely, I think is the... Somebody was asked that at a private event, so now I said it publicly. I think choose your chairman wisely. No, I think it's a very important point here, actually, where you say we try to make, and it's relevant to S4 Capital, is to make it a unitary company. And because some of the things that we see, whether it be VML getting together with Y&R, which really doesn't affect India, or JWT and Wonderman, which does affect India.
Yeah.
I mean, I was saying just before, it seems to me to be round the wrong way in India. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we had looked very carefully at the VML and Y&R getting together before I left WPP.
But we were told that the JWT Wonderman, merger was partly your idea.
Well, no, I mean, it was, people were thinking about it. It's an interesting question. I actually probably wouldn't have gone down that line. I saw Wonderman more as being the digital underpinning for the whole organization. So if you're asking, it's quite an interesting question. So my view was you had to simplify the verticals, which we were doing with WPP Healthcare, branding and identity, Group M, Kantar, all those things that we were trying to do. I mean, the four creative agencies, it was difficult to do because you had J. Walter Thompson, you had Ogilvy, you had Y&R and Gray. How could you put them together in one way, shape or form? So that was more difficult, but it's simplifying the verticals, getting more country management. Srini here is a classic example of that. Sure. More client-led management as well, because we had 50 account directors or whatever it was, trying to drive the business around the world. And then the last thing was putting a sort of digital underpinning through, like Hogarth, and indeed, in my mind, sort of Wonderman as well. So I might have actually gone that way. Rather than the JWT Wonderman thing. But the interesting thing, what I would not have done is the naming. I would have had it as Y&R VML. I remember I was in Brazil and Argentina at the time they announced it. And Young and Rubicam in Argentina and Brazil is part of the fabric of the advertising industry. And people were walking around saying, well, what the hell is, who is VML? And when you explained it was a Kansas-based digital agency, people looked a bit bemused. I mean, Young to them was a real force, is a real force still, biggest agency in Brazil, very significant operation in Argentina. So I would have had the name as Y&R VML. And I think that would have been a much more magnanimous gesture to the Y&R management, who seem to have been wiped out, basically, by VML, which may or may not be a good thing. We have to see what happens.
In my attempt to draw the softer side of Martin Sorrell, which I obviously fail miserably at, but you know, one must try, is that...
You know, if at first you don't succeed, what is the phrase? Try again. Right.
You know, after being the top boss of a media behemoth to being, you know,
starting
also
again.
Starting up.
Well,
like an upstart.
back to
right.
30. You know,
you're still
back to the future.
You're still a media mogul in terms of your
hardly.
personality.
I was never a media mogul.
But,
I wish.
Know, an upstart. Do you see significant changes?
Always been an upstart. Always been an upstart.
Oh well, you know,
always gone.
The numbers don't say so, but yeah, you know, if I had to ask you, the key observations you've made, and you know, you make astute observations about people, you know, upstarts versus leading in.
Well, there's a wonderful. Actually, I must get this one in. Actually, there was one. So we did the roadshow for Mighty Hive, and we saw, I think it was 20 institutions to raise funds for the deal, and one institution we were talking about, you know. Welding, I use the analogy of welding two aircraft carriers together. And he came out with this, investor came out with this wonderful saying. He said it was a Chinese saying, but I've asked an expert in Chinese sayings, it's not a Chinese saying, it might be an Indian one. If you tie two dead birds together, you may have 4 wings, but they may not fly.
He's obviously referring to your 2 acquisitions.
Well, I'm not saying anything, but I just thought it's a great way of putting it. The dead birds analogy.
You've also been recently, you know, accused of, you know, talking down WPP. And I think people are very frustrated.
That's not fair at all, because you know, not done. No, you're going back to what you said. You know, I would always regard WPP as being my baby.
You're a big shareholder as well.
And still, thank you very much. You know, I have to be top down shareholder.
You're invested.
Why shouldn't a shareholder make a comment? Are we living in a time when shareholders shouldn't make comments? I mean, that's a little bit naughty, isn't it?
I've really missed interviewing you.
We're in the CSR world. Shouldn't we be sort of shareholder democracy, isn't it?
Because the recent statement by, you know, Johnny Hornby.
Who?
Johnny Hornby.
Suddenly Johnny Hornby is a spokesperson for WPP?
He seems to be really peeved.
I think
he's really
well,
peeved.
I think he's peeved because he was never on the list to become CEO of WPP.
Oh, is it? Okay, fair enough.
In his own mind he thought he was, but I don't think anybody else did.
Given that you've made two acquisitions, could you explain to me what, in your mind, is your complete model for S4?
Well, we interestingly, I mean, some people regard this as being semantics. We refer to them as mergers because, for example, Victor and Wesley, his partner, have a very significant stake in S4 Capital, as I do.
Right.
And as Peter Kim and Christopher Martin, when we complete the deal just before Christmas, will have a significant stake. And this is a really important point. So we're trying to get it unitary for the reasons we've already discussed, you know, the sort of JWT, Wonderman, VML, Y&R reasons, but we're doing it from scratch. We're trying to get people to think as one. There are no earn-outs. You know, we've said we've eschewed that as a financial tactic. They're really mergers that are taking place. And when we talked to Victor or Wesley or Pete or Chris, and the very first sentence was, if you want to sell your company in the form of an earn-out over a relatively short period of time, it's not for us. There's no point in us wasting our time, your time, or indeed our advisors' time, unless you're committed to the idea of selling in or buying in. Because what we want to do is create an integrated entity. There is also, you know, the learning experience you asked me about in the context of 2018, and I made that comment about, you know, choose chairman carefully. I think there's a serious point here. I think in the UK system where you have chairman and CEO, it's very important that the chairman and the CEO operate as one.
How's that possible?
Well, they operate effectively as one. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's possible. I mean, I've been asked many times, you know, what makes a good chairman? And I actually said that, you know, the best chairman I ever had was Hamish Maxwell or Phil Later. Those two sort of stand out because they never grandstanded. Phil had been ambassador to the UK, American ambassador to the UK. Hamish Maxwell actually had run the largest company in the world. Philip Morris had surpassed Citibank for 1 quarter, but it was been the biggest one. They didn't grandstand. They got the T-shirt. They were comfortable in their own skin, and they didn't seek to interfere unduly. I mean, if they thought something was wrong, or they were strategically, advice, they'd take me out to the woodshed and give me the advice. But no grandstanding. And I think that's really important in that structure. So it's not just unitary from a management point of view, it's unitary from a governance point of view. So you don't have a separate line of chairman and council or CEO and performance. So process and performance, the two are together.
Fair enough. But I was really asking you, while my intention was to draw the softer side of Martin Sorrell about the upstart and running the largest media conglomerate.
I hated that word conglomerate. It was a fairly focused group.
Agile communication,
advertising and marketing
company.
services. Yeah.
Right. So difference in terms of overnight, in terms of people's people.
Yeah.
Perception. And the whole world, I think, can view things with a different angle.
Yeah, listen. I mean, I think everything that happened, and I've said this before, it was sad in that sense. But out of every cloud has a silver lining, and there's some interesting opportunities that come out of that. The good news is I have a clean sheet of paper, so I have none of the legacy trappings or anchors or weights to worry about. The bad news is I have a clean sheet of paper, and that I don't have the scale. But that, if we're good, I mean, the key issue for us, post Mighty Hive really, is to focus on execution and to implement, because I think we have the seeds, if you like, but to implement the totally integrated model that is designed for new era, new age, built around digital in those 3 areas. I mean, there are 2 obvious areas of content and media planning and buying. The third area of first-party data is much more difficult because the clients often have first-party data. So many of the clients that we work with now are feeding us first-party data. You see here in India in the telecommunications business. Look at the data they have about your habits on the phone.
Yet they don't get it right.
But in time they will. Right? I mean, there are all sorts of issues around privacy and brand safety and all these sort of things around data, which are becoming by the day. I mean, I read an article overnight about Australia looking into Google and Facebook from a regulatory point of view and talking about separating the Chrome browser from Google. I mean, these are serious regulatory issues that are coming up. But putting that to one side at the minute, this clearly enables us to be much more effective and efficient in the way that we can communicate with the consumer. We know how he or she is consuming products and services, what their preferences are. We know how he or she are consuming media, so we can match the two. So Media Monk sort of makes the content, Mighty Hive distributes it in the most effective and efficient way. So the things come together. The other area that's really interesting is how we can use first-party data in a much more effective way.
Are you saying in time you will completely not look at traditional in the mix? Not now, but in time.
Well, I've started. Look, McKinsey did a study about what makes companies successful, and the biggest single factor, it's about 4 or 5 years ago, the biggest, because they looked at the S&P 500 today versus the last 10 years, and they found the churn, because the company's life stages are compressed.
Okay.
Life cycles are compressed. The biggest single determinant was top line growth. CEOs, cost cutting, whatever, were subsidiary to being in the right place at the right time. So what I did when I left WPP is I thought about the $20 billion portfolio and where's the growth? The growth is in digital content, number 1. It's in first-party data, syndicated data, number 2, and it's in digital media planning and buying, number 3. So those are the 3. If you looked at the portfolio, if you had perfect knowledge of that portfolio, you would see that the biggest growth, the biggest areas of growth are those 3 areas.
You'd be the perfect person to answer the question, given that all holding companies today are restructuring,
right,
and all are positioning.
They're all moving in the same. They're moving in the same direction.
Exactly, and everybody has the same mantra. There is no differentiating mantra. What really is the restructuring that they're grappling with? And do you think the restructuring will solve the problem?
Well, you know, I've spoken to two big financial institutions in the last week, both of whom said to me that they think the agency business is structurally challenged.
Sure.
You know, one was a financial institution, one was, you know, a private equity, and both said exactly the same thing. I sort of disagree with that. I do not think the key issue for us, you know, is Facebook and Google. Because if I look at, you know, what Group M, for example, did with Google in the Indian market, worked with them to build their business, and Facebook too, and not just in the Indian market but beyond. When I think about how big a sort of customer Group M was for Google, you know, $5 billion last year. Facebook $2 billion. You know, the only one that was bigger than Facebook was Fox, and with Disney, obviously, it'll be even bigger, but not as big as Google. So, to my mind, Facebook and Google were partners. I mean, we called them frenemies,
yeah.
but they became friendlier frenemies. That was number one. So I don't think it's that. Do I think it's the consultancies, Deloitte, Accenture? They get in up here. You know, the day that Unilever was under attack very briefly from Kraft Heinz. You know, we were in there talking to Unilever about the €1 billion project that Accenture had sold in to Paul Polman, Graham Pitkethly, and Keith Weed to try and reduce costs in that world that I described of low GDP growth. So I don't. They do compete. You know, they buy the monkeys. I don't know what they bought in India, but they bought 4 companies in Germany. Kohlrebe, a very respected creative agency there, but you know, very difficult for them to integrate it. They're running almost into the same problem as the other companies. So there's a bit of an issue there, but I don't think it's a fundamental. Insourcing? No, because the agencies could help clients do that, and it doesn't. There's care and maintenance there. I think the fundamental issue is the pressure. So here in India, for the last 2 or 3 days, I've been trying to get the temperature of the economy, and you know, it's very mixed, the views. I mean, you know, I think 1/3 of the people here thought things were good, 1/3 thought they were very tough, and 1/3 neither one thing or the other. And obviously this has political dimensions as well. And then we have next year, we have the general election. So clearly, you know, I'm trying to get a sort of feeling for what's going on, but what I think people are worried about is lack of employment opportunities, unemployment opportunities, or lack of opportunities, and that the growth in the economy is not sufficient to generate the jobs that are necessary. I think that's the fundamental issue. You agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think we have people say it's a population dividend that we have. I think it's a liability, but that, of course.
Yeah, but you don't want the other problem, which is, you know, the aging problem, which China faces or Russia faces, or which really the rest of the world faces. I mean, India will be the most populous country in the planet because the birth rate remains high. It's not at the 2.4 level. You know, the tipping point is at 2.1, which is the worldwide level that would tip us into the aging problem for the world as a whole. But anyway, coming back to the issue, that's the fundamental issue. So clients are very focused on cost, very little inflation, very little pricing power, very focused on cost. That's where the real pressure comes from. So I don't think the agency model is busted as long as it adjusts. Now, if you look at the competition, Omnicom I don't think is very strategic, but they have very excellent businesses. So I think they have to sort of formulate a more powerful strategy. Publicis has a very strong strategy, you know, one Publicis, but they've gone so fast, I think that a lot of their businesses like Saatchi and Burnett and BBH have lost traction, frankly, which is a sort of issue that we're talking about in JWT, Wunderman, DML, Y&R. Dentsu, I think, is very well positioned. I mean, in India, I would say, if you talk to people at WPP, they would say the most potent competitor in India is potentially Dentsu. Why? Media focus, data focus with Merkel, and digital focus. So I think that's the positioning. IPG, you know, strong competitor here in India, but generally around the world, they're doing very well.
Even with their results, I think they've been doing.
They've done very well. I think analysts, when you talk to them, are not puzzled by it, but they've come from a very low base because they were at death's door a few years ago, more than a few years ago. But they've done very well. Probably the McCann focus and concentration. There's a sort of mini IPG inside IPG. And so that's probably helps them, and the size probably enables them to focus more. And then Havas has disappeared into Vivendi. I think potentially the most interesting model because it's very different. You know, a media company with an agency, very unusual. Obviously a potential for conflicts of interest, but I think actually quite an interesting model with some very dynamic management. The Bolloré family are not mugs.
So you don't see any of them collapsing in the near future?
No, I think I see them consolidating.
Consolidating.
Yes, I
so
think
there will be buyouts.
Yeah, there's got to be. There's got to be. There's too much
capacity. Would you place your hat in the ring?
Would I place my hat in the ring? No, I don't want to go back to back to the future in that sense. I mean, if there were bits. Sure. Good bits, you know. I've told you where the good bits are.
Yes.
I've given you the list.
Yes.
If there were good bits available, I'd be very eager to have them.
What's the India plan? You must have an India plan. You love us.
Well, India, you know, it's a market structure here is dominated by somebody I know. But you know, there are lots of people here who are very talented.
Right.
I mean, Piyush being appointed, you know, we were talking about it before we started. That should not be a surprise. I mean, India has been, I mean, he was honoured at Cannes last year, which was one of the nice things that happened this year at Cannes. You know, and about time too. So I think that's a very good move by John Seifert to put Piyush in that position. And he's very strong creatively. And he understands the shifts that's taking place in the marketplace. And he understands what needs to be done to shift it. But he put India at the centre, which it should be. It'll be the most populous country on the planet, and therefore, you know, just if intelligence is normally distributed, be the place to come.
On that note, I think I'm out of time, but lovely meeting you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for giving me the time.
I hope we didn't give you the soft side.
I'll try harder, but it was absolutely my pleasure meeting with you.
All right, good to see you. Good to see you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.